Welcome to The Wedding Edit, a wedding planning podcast for the modern couple. We are your hosts, Kelly and Dana. Today, we would love to welcome the beautiful, wonderful and talented Lydia Lauder from Stemhaus and Flora Blume. She is the co-founder of Stemhaus and the founder of Flora Blume. So good to have you here today. We're very excited to have you. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we've got the lovely little Oakley as well, but he's asleep. So if there's any cute baby noises, you'll know what that is all about. And I promise none of the pop-offs are from any of us girls or Doug.
Or Olive.
Well, I can't promise that, but we'll see. So, Lydia, tell us how you got into floristry and particularly into the wedding industry. We'd love to hear all about that.
Yeah, so I started with floristry when I was 15. I can remember the moment when it all happened. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and my mum was like, oh, have a look through like the job ads in the Trading Post or whatever it used to be back in those days.
Yeah. Career one.
Yeah, something like that. And I was skimming through and there was like a job advertisement for a florist assistant, and I was like, oh, floristry, that sounds like a fun job, because I liked the creative side of things. And that same day my grandma popped in and I was like, oh, I think I want to try floristry. And she was like, oh, I know a florist. I know a local florist. Let's pop in and see if you can do some work experience. So all in this same day, she takes me in to meet this lady, and the lady was like, oh, yeah, I need someone to help out. Do you want to start today? You can have a job.
That's so good.
What? That's crazy. All in one day.
All in one day.
That would have to be a record. Like
was
first job, looked in the paper and was employed on the same day as I decided to find a job.
Yep. And so that's how it kind of started, working in a bit of floristry. And she offered me a traineeship after I'd been doing just some part-time work there for a while. So that's how I started as a florist. I did my traineeship with her for 3 years and then branched out into other floristry areas, which landed me working for a wedding company that focused purely on weddings, not just floristry, but like the whole
Oh, wow.
lot.
Yeah.
So they did wedding setups, wedding styling, like invitations.
I didn't know this
everything.
about you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's how I kind of started my love for weddings, because it wasn't just the flowers that I loved about it. I loved the whole crazy industry.
Did you get involved in other parts of that business, or
I
were you mainly flowers?
So I was doing like setups. I was helping like couples choose their stationery. I was helping them do the setups of ceremonies, receptions, like tying bows on chairs.
Wow, now I know who to
all of
call
that.
on when I need an extra set of hands.
Yeah, I used to be able to do like 100 bows on chairs in like an hour.
Thank goodness that no one wants chair bows anymore.
I'm really glad that has like phased out.
Yeah.
The organza material, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And the satin, it was,
Chair covers.
yeah,
Oh.
They're like a thing of the past, I think.
I hate
hope.
them.
I hope so.
Hate is such a strong word, but
Imagine if they came back though. Sorry,
I know.
continue.
Well, everything does eventually, doesn't it? So that was my sort of foot into the wedding industry, and obviously I did all their bouquets and flowers for them as well while I worked there. And after that, I was working in a retail florist, which is the one that eventually bought. So
That's
is now Flora Blume.
oh, yeah.
And we did weddings through there as well. And I always, wherever I worked, seemed to just end up doing the weddings, because that's
What you had.
what I loved.
Yeah.
And then worked on a really beautiful wedding with a friend, and that's when Stemhaus founded itself, because we combined our talents to create, some really beautiful weddings.
Oh, that's awesome. So today we're going to sort of talk about, well, all things flowers, but we have a long list of questions for Lydia, because I feel like flowers is so important. It's such an important part of weddings, and often a lot of people don't know a lot of the things that go on in the background and, why flowers cost a certain price. So one question I've got for you is, what does the average bouquet cost? And, you might want to talk through seasonal versus premium bouquet.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So these days when people come asking for a wedding quote for just one bouquet, I usually will say minimum 250 and it goes up from there. So
and that's for seasonal?
That's for seasonal. So 250 will cover like a seasonal bouquet, your medium sort of average size. And then obviously if you're wanting more premium blooms, the price just goes up from there.
Yeah. So for our listeners, can you talk us through what seasonal would be and what would premium be?
So seasonal flowers are the flowers that are grown in Australia and are what is grown particularly like in spring or summer or winter or autumn. So whenever the event is, it's what's like naturally available at that time. These flowers come to us much easier and cheaper because we don't have to get them in from other places.
Yeah.
So you'd be thinking of things like your native flowers, your proteas and, lisianthus, scabiosas, ranunculi, all those really springy flowers, tulips, dahlias, that's all what we would call a seasonal bloom. And then premium is when you're looking at roses and orchids. Most of these aren't grown in Australia, so we have to import them from overseas. So they come with like additional cost.
Yeah, okay. And so how much would a premium bouquet be if a seasonal was like starting at $250 for a standard size?
Yeah, so our premium bouquets usually are around your $350, so you can expect to pay at least another $100 to get something that is, say, for instance, completely roses or a combination of roses and orchids. They don't have a lot of greenery or no greenery in them at all. Anything like that is going to be around your $350.
Yeah. So like a trend I see at the moment, I don't know if it'll be a trend forever, but just the long stem rose bouquet. So if people are looking at that, all roses, long stems, no foliage really, is that sort of $350?
Yeah, I mean with the long stem rose bouquets, we've got to think that most roses are costing between $10 to $15 a stem. So depending on how big you want that to be.
That's even more than $350.
It can even go above $350.
Wow.
So Lydia, we hear a lot about like flowers being so expensive and people always asking, why are flowers so expensive? And people don't realise, I guess, what goes into everything. So I thought you could like maybe guide us through, why do flowers cost what they do?
Yeah, so I think the best way to unpack that is to really look at everything that's involved in getting a flower grown and then into your wedding bouquet or a florist shop. With our local flowers, you've got growers that have to care for this flower, fertilise it, many, many hours going into their crops, wages, rent, all of that they have to cover when they are then selling that flower wholesale, which then we're purchasing. We have those costs to consider as well. So, we have to put our markup on. So by that stage, you're getting the price of the flower. Yeah. So, this can vary from like $3 to like $10 depending on what the flower is and how much effort it takes to create this flower. Then we also can look at where they're coming from. So if they're not coming locally, we are getting them from interstate. So they're getting bought in on trucks, which we've got then the fuel costs, the wages there and, refrigeration, all of this to consider. Imported flowers is like another step. Again, we're looking at shipping containers and we're looking at flights to bring these flowers into the country and be processed. Like they go through really strict quarantine. So there's a lot that's involved. So if you look at all of that, you can really see why a flower costs so much.
So, Lydia, what sort of labour is involved in the lead up to a wedding as a wedding florist? Can you talk us through a typical lead up process?
Of course. So when we are starting a wedding, I think our couples think that their flowers come in the morning of their wedding and are put together and they're all ready to go like that. That is a common misconception. We will start a wedding process like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday in a lead up for a wedding on the weekend. So our flowers are sometimes coming in on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, especially anything imported. We need to make sure that there's lots of time for those to come in because they've got to be processed through quarantine at the airport and all of that before we even get our hands on them. So we don't want to leave that timing too close, otherwise you could end up with no flowers for your wedding. So we're getting those in on Tuesday or a Wednesday.
When you say getting those in, maybe talk us through how do you get
what
the
that
flowers?
means.
Yeah. Because you have to actually go to the market, don't you?
So we, with the imported flowers, which is what is in a lot of weddings at the moment, so that's why I'm referencing them a lot. They come through a flower wholesaler, so that person is communicating with the overseas grower to get them into the state through the airports. And then we will go and collect them from the wholesaler. So the wholesaler will be at the airport, at 3 or 4 a.m. picking up the flowers and then bringing them to their warehouse, which is where we'll then collect them and check them all off, make sure that they've come in the right colours, the right quantities. If anything's not right, we often have to, that's the point where we'll be making any substitutions and coming up with plan A or plan B or plan C sometimes to correct anything that might not be right.
So it's not just a matter of like walking in, drive through, pick up your flowers and off you go. Like it can be there for, how long are you usually there for?
I can quite often be there for an hour to do a pickup, to go through everything. So it is quite a process even just at that point. Mm-hmm. Once we have collected them, we bring them all back to our studio and we start to prepare them. So every single packet has to be like undone. Every single stem of flower has the foliage like removed. They get recut, they get wired, they get put into like fresh water. And then depending on what we need that flower to do, they'll be put into a cool room so that they stay nice and tight, or they'll be left out so that they can start to open a little bit.
Yeah, and like a lot of people don't realise that with the roses that look really open, that people like that look where the petals are kind of all
flexed.
Yeah,
so they call it reflexing a rose, and a lot of couples don't know that that's actually like the florist actually does that by hand.
It takes a long
one
time.
petal at a time.
I mean, you're probably really fast at it now.
Even so, when we've got a wedding with a lot of roses, you can spend like a whole day just reflexing all the roses because it's a really slow and careful process so that you're not actually bruising or damaging any of the petals. You're just pulling them open.
We might even put a photo of a reflexed rose up in our
I think I've got
YouTube
one.
video so that people can see exactly what that means. I mean, a lot of people probably know what it is, but I think there'd be a lot of people out there that don't know what that means, and they think the rose just comes like that.
Yeah, don't realise that that's a manual process that we put the rose through, and we actually need it to sit out in room temperature for a little while to actually soften enough that we can, manipulate the petals without damaging them.
Can't they?
Yeah.
Like what do you call it? Not the bulb. The head of the flower can be really tight in like the roses, but then I think as they get older, do they loosen more and more?
They do.
Then they like drop their petals.
Yeah. So they'll and when they're in a fridge, they'll be like really like crisp and tight, and then once they're in room temperature for a little while, they'll soften a bit.
That's so fascinating.
And
then
you can't reflex them too soon either, can you? Because if you reflex them like 3 days before the wedding, they don't keep as well, do they?
Not as well. So usually like that's what we'll be doing on like a Thursday or a Friday.
right before the wedding.
Right before the wedding we'll be reflexing, and it can take one person the whole day to do the roses for just one wedding. It's quite a process. It is quite therapeutic, but it's time consuming. So
you're paying people to do that.
To get that beautiful look that couples want for their wedding flowers, that's what's required. And then with our roses, we quite often will put a support wire on them too, depending what they're going to be used for, so that it's like an extra insurance that on the day nothing's going to fall over and look like it's dying. So that again is another step that goes through everything to have the flowers looking their best. Once this has all been done, we'll spend hours dividing them all up into the areas, so we know we've got everything ready to put into the arrangement.
So dividing them up in terms of like, this is for the bouquets, this is for the table settings. Okay.
And we'll do the bouquets first, because the bouquets will always get like the best blooms out of what's come in. So separating them all, and then we are finally ready to actually start putting them into arrangements, which can be another whole day of creating. Arranging. I mean, one bouquet will take a florist about an hour to put together, and then you've got your table arrangements and your bar arrangements and your sign arrangements. Ceremony. We quite often do ceremonies on site, so that doesn't always get constructed beforehand, but even just preparing everything, making sure it's ready to go. So there's like a 3-4 day lead up before we even get to the wedding day in what goes into getting these flowers ready for the wedding.
Yeah, and then like I just thought, it just popped into my head, hanging installations. A lot of people don't actually know what goes into that. I'm opening a can of worms here. But I think it's a really important thing to educate people on, because a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know before I was a wedding stylist, that often when there's a hanging installation, obviously there needs to be a structure to hang from, but often that structure is provided by a lighting or someone who can rig it. So you need to have certain licenses to be able to rig something, because it's hanging above people's heads. You can't just like hang it from fishing wire and hope that it doesn't land on someone. So there's also like added costs which aren't always necessarily part of the florist quote. Some florists will incorporate it in their quote, but then there's those added costs. So that's why I think, it is so expensive. Weddings, there's no wedding tax as such. People think, in my opinion, I mean, you might
doesn't sound like you're getting paid enough.
No, definitely not. No, but I don't think there's a wedding tax when it comes to flowers.
No, definitely not. I think it's more the fact that there's just so much time required to create what needs to be created for a wedding. So that is why it costs more than just like a bunch of flowers you pick up from your local florist. Because that does not have the same amount of time and preparation as going into someone's wedding day. We want to make sure everything is perfect. So, even sorting the flowers to, we'll get some in that aren't the best quality. So we have to like sort them and make sure that everything is going to be beautiful for on the day.
Yeah, and how often do you throw a party for 150 people and, cover all your tables in flowers? Of course it's going to be expensive. Yeah. So I think when you look at what's required, it makes a lot more sense why wedding flowers are expensive.
Yeah, for sure. So we're talking about the price of things then. If a couple decided to have more like greenery or foliage, would this then make perhaps it's a bit more affordable for them? Like, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so using any type of foliage is always going to bring your costs down a little bit. We have a lot of mechanics that we use in floristry to create these designs, and we need to cover them so that they can't be seen. So just all you see is beautiful flowers. When you're using foliage, that's a really, cost-effective way to cover what we've done in the behind the scenes. create fullness, and then you've got your flowers incorporated in that, but you don't need so many. So if you think like a wedding flower, most of them are going to cost between $7 to $10 just as an average guide per bloom. That's going to add up really quickly, especially if you're using only flowers and you've got to cover everything to create a really full, luxurious look. Whereas greenery, you might be paying instead $25 for a whole bunch that can cover a lot of area much quicker. That is why greenery is going to cost a lot less than just going all flowers.
Yeah. Is there less labour involved with greenery as well? Like obviously there's still labour, but is there less of that?
Yeah, so you don't have to prep a bunch of greenery to the same extent that you're going to have to prep a bunch of roses. So
yeah,
it costs a lot less
space as well.
And it covers a lot more space than one rose.
Yeah.
So
I actually thought of another question. Sorry, flowers are just, there's so much. And I'd once had a bride say to me, like we're going to save money we're just going to cut the olive leaf off some like trees and we're just going to like throw it on the table and make foliage runners out of olive leaf. And me not being a florist but like knowing what goes on, I was like, I don't think you can just throw a tree branch on a table and make it look like a nice foliage runner. Like I think there's a bit of prep involved in that. Can you talk us through that? Because I think that's something that a lot of people think. We'll save money. We'll snip it off grandma's olive trees. Yeah, eucalyptus, because eucalyptus is blue gum is so
and because it's so stiff, it like sits.
It
really
looks a bit weird,
but also it like doesn't look how it would look if a florist put it there.
It doesn't look like flowy and beautiful when you just chuck it on the table. And also I've seen someone try to do it and there's just ants everywhere and I'm like, you don't want ants on your white linen tablecloth.
Yeah.
No.
So talk us through that. Like, is it possible if people want to DIY certain aspects like foliage runners down their tables, like is there a little bit involved in actually making them look good?
There's definitely a bit of an art to it. I mean, it's about choosing the right parts of the foliage so that it will sit really nicely, and even just the way that you position on the tables so that it looks like a beautiful like running foliage runner rather than just a branch laying on a table.
Do you have to wire bits together as well?
We do sometimes, It depends what foliages we're using. Sometimes if you're using a mix, you might, intertwine them all and wire them together to make a joined section. Sometimes we are just laying it, but again, there is like a pattern that we follow, and it's about choosing the right parts of that foliage. You can't just get the stem of blue gum and go straight on the table. It has to be cut in a certain way and then laid in a certain way to create the look that you're after.
I know. I just think it's important though, because I think it is something that people do think, well, we could save some money here by doing this, but if you're a bit finicky about how you want it to look, you probably need a professional to do it.
I've just become very self-conscious about this little arrangement that I put together myself.
That actually looks quite good. I'm impressed.
It's not finished. I think I just put it all kind of together, and then I've got some more stuff that I need to put in there. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, I invited a florist to my home and I've got all these florals that don't look that great.
They look great.
They do look great.
Thank you. I'm like, there's probably like several mistakes there. Be good if I had something to like put them in, like chicken wire or whatever.
It just helps them stand up the right way.
More structure. Yeah.
So Lydia, if a couple has a friend or a family member who maybe dabbles in floristry or is a florist, is it okay for them to maybe get that person to do some of their wedding flowers and then perhaps get a florist to do the rest? So would that affect the overall look? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that one comes down to the individual florist, what they're comfortable working with. Me personally, I don't do weddings that way. We've spent a lot of time building our brand and people are expecting a certain look, and our name is attached to every image that's going out connected to that wedding, whether we did the flowers or not. So because of that, we have quite a strict policy that if we're doing the flowers, we're doing everything from the bouquets to the ceremony to the reception, and we wouldn't allow anyone else to have a part of that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are plenty of florists out there that are quite happy to work in that sort of environment. It is definitely worth, though, thinking about what you're actually asking of the person who's going to be doing this for you. So if they're a part of the wedding party or a family member or a guest, there is a lot of pressure involved in doing flowers and also being part of a wedding. I've done it many times before. I've done weddings for friends when I've been in the bridal party. Recently I did one for my cousin and was a guest at her wedding, and I'm a florist, so it all comes naturally to me and I know how to manage the time. But I was still rushing around from here to there to try and, check what's going on in the reception and then rushing back to be part of family photos. We only just got to the ceremony in time because I had to do the setup and then race home and get my hair and makeup done and then race back.
It's not ideal.
There's a lot involved when you ask that of someone, and I'm more than happy to do that for my friends and family. But I think as the couple, you've got to think what you're actually asking of that person if they're going to be doing that for you.
Yeah, and the pressure that will put on them.
It does put a lot of pressure, and it sometimes can take enjoyment out of the wedding then, depending on how much you're asking them to do.
That's a good point, because you want, I think as the couple, you want your guests to really enjoy and be relaxed and not stressed or rushed or anything like that. So that's a really good point to bring up, because I think there's a lot of behind the scenes that people just don't even realise as well.
Yeah.
And especially if it's not something they do all the time.
For sure.
What about people that have friends that aren't necessarily experienced at doing wedding flowers, but they just like flowers and they like to chuck flowers together at home? Would you say that's a big risk?
I think that's a big risk and a lot of pressure to put onto someone, because people feel pressure when it's a wedding. I feel pressure even after so many weddings, that what I'm doing is someone's wedding, so it has to be perfect. And you're putting that pressure onto someone who doesn't have that confidence that comes from doing it all the time, and they can get quite stressed. I've had people come to my shop on the day of their wedding. So-and-so was meant to put their wedding flowers together and it just hasn't come together, and can we put something together for them?
Yeah, well, and the sourcing side of it, if it's someone who's never sourced in flowers or done the whole, going to the markets on a Tuesday and realising that some of the flowers you've ordered haven't turned up, if they don't have that experience to kind of pivot in that moment and find a substitute, I guess it could all go badly. And, you don't really need that stress on the week of your wedding where that person's sort of, without realising it, has let you down.
Yeah,
and you're not running around to a florist shop trying to find a bouquet.
Exactly. And it's not intentional that that person might let you down. It's just the circumstances, because you're dealing with a natural product that doesn't always come in exactly as you want it to. So
I guess the message there is, if it's someone who's got the experience, they've done it before, it can probably work fine, but you need to think about, I guess, the risks involved if it's someone who maybe hasn't got that experience with wedding flowers.
Yeah, and it may sound nice to, all the bridesmaids and the bride to be putting the bouquets together the night before, because, you just want that really natural
bonding experience.
Yeah, and you want that natural wildflower look. But there's a lot that you have to go through in the day before your wedding, and maybe putting flowers together at night is not really going to be what you feel like doing when you get to that point in time.
Yeah. So Lydia, tell us about other things that a couple might have to set up, like candles or anything else, I guess, apart from flowers. If they've got things to set up and they don't have a stylist, is that something that you potentially look after?
It certainly can be. I guess it depends on the extent that needs to be done. If a couple come to us and want candles set up on their table, by all means we can do that. If they want us to set up, a few styling elements for their ceremony, that can also be done. I will always get the full extent before I agree to anything. And if it is sounding like it's a lot and they start, adding like napkins and table place cards and things like that, that's when I'll definitely be recommending a stylist.
Yeah.
That is as something that they need if they haven't already got one in place. And then they've just got to be aware if we are setting up candles or any other styling elements, we are going to be charging for that. So
of course,
it's not just going to be a free service that we throw in with the flowers, because that's going to take additional time and sometimes going to require we have an extra staff member on site. So we will look at the whole job, and if we have the capacity to do it, we certainly can. But it is going to be limited to things like, some candles on the table or,
something simple
things at the ceremony. Yeah. We're not going to be styling a whole wedding as well as doing the flowers, because the flowers is already such a big part of it.
Yeah.
So how could couples be, or we in general, be more sustainable about our use of florals?
So it's worth considering what you're going to be doing with your flowers after the wedding. I think that's where you can be the most sustainable. You don't want to be just throwing them all into the bin afterwards. So whether you look at how they're going to be on your tables, is it something that your guests can take home to enjoy afterwards so that they're not going to end up in the bin? Can you use more things, like some items in more than one place is also something that we often encourage our couples to do, so that we're not wasting items. So you can remove some items from your ceremony and reuse them in a different spot in your reception, rather than buying extra ones that then, you've got something extra at the end of the night that has to be either disposed of or taken home.
Yeah, so even if you have to pull some stuff out and rebuild to make another arrangement at the reception, obviously there's labour involved, but you're not having to buy more flowers and dispose of more flowers, I suppose.
Absolutely. That's actually a question we get asked all the time, is can we reuse our ceremony arbor flowers on our bar or our bridal table? You definitely can, but you can't just cut it off
and
put it on there. There is you'll have to be kind of rebuilt. So we will offer that service to rebuild, and we'll allow time in our schedule to reconstruct it so that it suits its new area. And that way you can minimise, the wastage of having extra items where they're not needed. But it will all come down to the timings and the schedule as to whether it's actually possible to do that.
Having vases for your bouquets, maybe for the gift or dessert table, or...
Yeah, absolutely. Reusing things in as many places as possible.
Yeah.
And then, after the wedding, considering what's actually going to be happening with the flowers, and we'll have that conversation with our couples. Do they want us to take care of that, or is that something that they have a plan for? We can always, take them back and bunch them up if they like to then give to people.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they can send them to a nursing home or something like that, where they can continue to be enjoyed rather than just ending up in the rubbish bin afterwards.
Yeah. I've had a bride that I worked with donated her wedding flowers to her grandma's nursing home.
Oh, that's sweet.
After the wedding, and they loved it, and it really brightened a lot of the residents' day. I think lots of residents got some little vase of flowers. So that's a really good way.
So Lydia, we'd love to know what are some of the things that we can do after a wedding to preserve our flowers? What are some of the things that you can do with the flowers after the wedding?
Yes, this is actually a question I get asked all the time, and quite often people leave it till too late. So we'll get asked the week before or a couple of days after a wedding, oh no, what can I do with my bouquet? I really want to keep it.
Yeah.
There is a few different options, and they can be dried and framed, which is, I guess, an older sort of style. One really popular trend at the moment is to have the flowers preserved and then put into like a resin orb. That is my favourite. That one requires pre-booking about 3 or 4 months beforehand, and then you have to package up your flowers and send them to the company that preserves them, and they will dry them all out and put them into a beautiful little resin clear orb that you can
so
sit
cool.
on like a
paperweight.
Yeah, like a paperweight. They range in size from like paperweight to quite large, like a globe sort of size.
How do people present that? Like a larger one? Like is it a plate or is it like a framed thing? Or?
The ones I've seen have been like actually like more like a ball shape, so you get that 3D
Like
viewing.
a crystal ball.
Yeah, like a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so you can like display that then on like a shelf or
Yeah.
That's really
something
beautiful.
like that. So
Yeah.
that's a really beautiful option. There's also just drying naturally your bouquet yourself, where you can hang the flowers upside down in a cool dry spot and let them just dry naturally, and that is a really good way to preserve them as well. So
What about the Phoebe Hunter? Doesn't she do you send your bouquet to
silks.
her and
Yeah.
she botanically dyes a scarf,
Yeah.
like a silk
Yes.
fabric, and you can keep that, and I guess you could make it could be a table runner or it could be a scarf or something for you to wear.
yeah,
I think you
that's
could make
definitely a
an
beautiful
art piece
option.
too out of some photos. Like if you had a specific kind of idea that you ran past your photographer.
So how much is a minimum spend for flowers and what would you get for that?
I think this is a very open-ended question.
Yeah, it's not really black and white.
Yeah, it does depend, I guess, whether you're going seasonal blooms or premium blooms. Generally, if someone comes to me, though, asking for like a ballpark figure, I will ask what they're expecting to get for, like, what are you covering? Are you just wanting like bouquet package, or are you wanting bouquet and ceremony, or are you wanting bouquet, ceremony, reception, like the works? And there's different price ranges for each. So your average bouquet package for like a standard size wedding, which might have a bridal party of 4 or 5, that I would say allow about $1,500 for just starting there. Then when you're thinking of a ceremony, I would usually say starting at about the $3,000 mark for a ceremony that includes an arbor or a feature piece of some type. Tables, like right off the top, I would say allow $100 per table as a minimum starting
Per
price.
you mean like actual trestle table,
Per
not like a
trestle
row.
table. Yeah, so
'cause
usually
some-
that means like for every 10 people,
Yeah.
allow about $100.
That's pretty good.
to start with.
Yeah. To start. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A starting price.
As
Yeah.
a starting price.
For each, and that's for like a pretty
That's pretty like
conservative
conservative.
sized. I mean, and another question that people often ask is, well, how many flowers should I have on the tables? And I often say, like, if you've got 4 people sitting opposite each other, 2 people and 2 people, 4 in a little, like a flower arrangement per 8 guests, or sorry.
Per 4 guests. We got it, Kelly.
Yeah,
Baby brain.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I was going to say, should we redo that? But no, you
Let's
sorted
just
me
move
out. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So like one arrangement per 4 guests. So per 2 people opposite each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so for a starting price of, if you're doing a whole wedding, $5,000 is fairly conservative for something of that size. I mean, this is thinking like your average wedding that has, 100 guests and a ceremony piece and a full bridal party.
That's quite
Obviously,
conservative though. Like you
yeah.
wouldn't be able to go statement florals for 5,000.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You would not be able to do statement. Whenever you want a statement piece, you need to instantly allow about $2,000 or $3,000 per piece. So whether that's hanging or arbors or pillars.
Yeah.
So what's something that couples should consider when choosing their florist for their wedding day?
I think you need to look at that florist's previous work and get recommendations, whether it's from other suppliers that you're working with. I think with flowers, you definitely get what you pay for. So you really want to make sure that you're locking in someone who's going to deliver what you're expecting.
Yeah.
Just because you're getting a cheap quote, you know, there may be a reason for that. So going with recommendations and looking at people's previous work is really important to make sure you are going to get what you're expecting from your florist. And also paying close attention to their style, because every florist has their own sort of style. And if you're wanting a certain type of style, you're better off choosing a florist who you've seen has done that type of style before.
That's so true.
Because we're all artists and we're going to put our own spin on everything. So it's finding that person that fits that look that you're going for and is going to give you the quality that you're wanting. And I definitely wouldn't base it on, you know, who's giving you the cheapest quote.
Yeah.
Because there could be a reason you're getting that cheapest quote, and on the day,
if you're looking
you
at
might be disappointed.
Yeah, like if you find a florist, I think if they're like a really rustic style and they're really cheap, but the photos that you've saved are like another florist's work who's got a completely different modern aesthetic, and you go to your cheaper florist or the florist that's maybe got a slightly more rustic style, asking them to create something that's someone else's work, it might not really be their style and it might not really come out the way you want it.
Absolutely. I think it's also important to consider that showing someone a photo, a florist, a photo, not to expect them to replicate it identically, because that's somebody else's work and we can certainly capture the same feel and the same sort of overall look by putting our own spin on it and making it our own, and also making it then the couple's own, so they are not coming out with flowers that match someone else's wedding. They've got their own look.
Yeah. I suppose it goes with any kind of creative industry. Like, you don't go to a stylist and ask them to replicate somebody else's entire wedding, or a photographer to replicate somebody else's style either. Exactly. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. You can use like elements from someone else's wedding to, you know, inspire what you're going to have for your wedding. But it's really important to let the florist also have a little bit of control there in what the end product looks like, so that you get something that's unique to you.
I'm sure it will end up even better then as well.
Absolutely.
And really beautiful.
Yeah. You can then, that's when you create the new style that someone else is going to want.
Yeah, exactly.
Having that element of trust is so important, and it helps like creativity flow, I think. If you trust your suppliers, you sort of say, look, I trust you. I like this look, but do your thing. And that's when the magic happens.
Exactly. And that's where it goes back to like how we were speaking earlier on, you know, making substitutions like on 4 days out. Like, if you have a florist that you can trust that if something doesn't go to plan, we're going to be able to still deliver, even if we might have to make some tweaks along the way.
Yeah.
You're still going to end up with an amazing product at the end.
Yeah.
Which is so important, because flowers just create such a big part of
they're really
the wedding day.
Yeah.
And the overall feel of it.
I think when asking for recommendations from other vendors, like you mentioned earlier, I think the three probably, I guess, like best vendors to like that will give you the closest recommendations is your wedding planner or stylist, and then also maybe your photographer as well, because they're the three that will know, if you give them photos, they'll know which florists have like the closest to that, and then they can recommend, especially if you're the wedding planner as well. They probably might know what your budget is as well as have the photo, and they can give you really good recommendations as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So last question, how soon should couples book their florist for their wedding?
I think like the sooner the better.
Yeah.
I feel with every big supplier that's contributing so much to such an important part of your day, the ones that will deliver the best quality and the best overall product, they're going to book out quick.
Yeah.
So you really want to be securing them as soon as possible.
What would the minimum time be? Like minimum 6, 8, 10 months, or you think longer than that?
I mean, 6 to 8 to 12 months, I guess that's the ideal period right there. And some people will book in their florist even further out than that, and that's completely fine. Anything within the 6 months, I think you could be struggling to find the right person to create.
Like you won't have as much choice.
So, Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. We can't thank you enough. You are just a huge wealth of knowledge with your over 15 years of experience in florals and the floristry industry. So thank you so much. And we just love to be able to tell all of our listeners where they can find you and your businesses. So we do have Stemhaus, which is on Instagram and Facebook. So you can have a look at them there. Just search in the bar Stemhaus on Facebook, and then it's at Stemhaus_ on Instagram. Then also with your beautiful Flora Blume store, you have at _Flora Blume. And then if people want to find, like actually come in person to your floristry store, how would they, like whereabouts is it?
So we're located on the corner of Ayres Avenue and Winston Avenue Indoor Park.
South Australia.
Australia.
And then if they want to get in contact from your website, it's just www.florablume.com.au. You can go there and have a look at everything, but also you can order flowers for your friends and family for any kind of special occasions or Valentine's Day, anything like that. I've personally received a few of your blooms and they've been really stunning and beautiful. So thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you know someone who's getting married who you think would benefit from listening to our podcast, feel free to share away.
We want to thank you all so much for your ongoing support and for listening to our podcast. We've had so much amazing feedback. Apparently it's not just our mums listening to the podcast, so we just want to thank you so much for supporting us.
My grandma too. No, she actually doesn't have an iPhone, so thank you for being
listening.
A friend. Should we sing a song?
We haven't sung in a little while.
What's a thank you song we can sing? We are so lame.
Was that fine? That was good.